It's become clear that the Trump administration is pushing for federal judges to strike down all of the Affordable Care Act, including several of its popular protections, like protections for those who have pre-existing conditions. Now, Trump was asked about this, and here is his answer.
The administration is making very clear that you think the Affordable Care Act is invalid and should be struck down. What is your message to Americans?
Let me just tell you exactly what my message is. The Republican Party will soon be known as the party of healthcare. You watch.
Okay, this is the same guy who said that people who lie should be banned from television. So that is, they will be known as the party who destroyed healthcare, and it is not an arguable position. So if you see a so-called debate on cable news, they are lying to you on purpose. They are being politically correct. They're not giving you the facts. The facts are the Trump administration has filed papers in court to completely get rid of the Affordable Care Act. Anna's gonna give you all the details, but I'll give the highlights right now. 21 million people would lose their insurance. Over 50 million people could lose their insurance because of pre-existing conditions. It's over 100 million people that would be affected by pre-existing conditions, but according to reports, over 50 million would lose their insurance because of pre-existing conditions. And then you have another 109 million people who would be affected by the lifetime and yearly caps. So hey, if your healthcare problem was really bad, like one that might kill you, and you ran into a cap, well, sad day for you. You have no more money, we're not gonna give it to you, and you're gonna bankrupt your entire family and then proceed to die, because that's the GOP plan. That's a fact. And there's Mitch McConnell right next to him. And all the Republican leaders, none of them are objecting to what the Trump administration is doing. I'm telling you right now, if you hear any journalists out there saying that, hey, we can't tell which one's that better healthcare plan, which one would cover more people or not, they are lying on behalf of the Republican Party because of political correctness. Tell the truth.
So the lies continue on social media as well, where Trump had tweeted, the Republican Party will become the party of healthcare. Now, I'm gonna give you all the reasons why that is untrue. First off, while they've been clear in their position on the Affordable Care Act, they have not proposed any policy that would take the Affordable Care Act's place. They are mentioning block grants, but there is no policy. And there are a number of protections here with the Affordable Care Act that are important, that have not been addressed by the GOP. So for instance, let's start with the pre-existing conditions and how much of an impact repealing or getting rid of the Affordable Care Act would have. Currently, as many as 133 million Americans, roughly half of the population under the age of 65, have pre-existing medical conditions that could disqualify them from buying a health insurance policy or cause them to pay significantly higher premiums if the health law were overturned. But if you want to get to serious pre-existing conditions, the Kaiser Family Foundation estimated that 52 million people have conditions serious enough that insurers would outright deny them coverage if the ACA were not in effect. Its estimates are based on guidelines insurers had in place about whom to cover before the federal law was enacted. So these were guidelines and policies that insurance companies already had. This was a practice that they were already doing prior to the passage of Obamacare.
Okay, so now the fact that Trump is lying about them being the party of healthcare, unless he means destruction of healthcare, is a fact, okay? And but when you turn to the Republican Party, I'm again issuing a challenge to all the so-called journalists in America. Are you gonna put every single Republican congressman on the spot? Because a lot of them in their campaign said, no, we wanna protect people with pre-existing conditions. Right now, the official policy position of the Trump administration is to deny you if you have a pre-existing condition. And by the way, they didn't change their position on that. They changed their position to be in favor of a total repeal of Affordable Care Act in the court system, right? But they had always been in favor of getting rid of protections for pre-existing conditions. So Republicans, which one is it? Are you with Donald Trump or are you for protecting people with pre-existing conditions? Because you cannot have it both ways. And if again, the mainstream media in this country lies on behalf of the Republican Party and calls it even, well, then they are no journalists at all. All they are is stenographers for the Republican and Democratic parties, And their job is to take the truth and twist it into lies so that, well, hey, I didn't offend Republicans, I lied on their behalf. That's what, so I'm not saying that they're doing that yet, although they have done that historically every time. New York Times has a good story about it today that lays out the facts, but they must go to the next step and say the Republicans are in favor of this policy, which would rob you of your health insurance. That's a fact. How many times do I have to say it? Oh, well, no, it's an opinion. You guys like the Democratic Party. No, I don't. I can't stand the Democratic Party. I think that their leadership is pathetic. I could go on, okay? I need you to report the facts. But again, largely, they will mostly, you turn on cable news, they'll have so-called debates, and they will do political correctness to call it even.
So let's talk about the number of people that would be impacted as a result of this change in policy or getting rid of the Affordable Care Act. So you hear the number 20 million Americans quite a bit, and I want to break that down for you. So currently, under the Affordable Care Act, there are 11.4 million Americans who buy health insurance through these Obamacare marketplaces. 12 million receive coverage through the expansion of Medicaid. So this is federal money, federal taxpayer money that's given to states to expand their Medicare program in order to cover low-income individuals. About 21 million are most at risk if Obamacare is struck down. That includes 9.2 million who receive federal subsidies. So let's talk about those subsidies a little bit because they're incredibly important. As we know, healthcare premiums are very expensive. And so if you are a low-income individual, it's hard for you to pay for that on your own. These subsidies help make those premiums affordable. So on average, the subsidies covered $525 of a $612 monthly premium for customers in the 39 states that use the federal marketplace, healthcare.gov. And I also want to note that there were red states who refused to accept that federal money in order to offer coverage to their constituents. Red states were so defiant about this that they were willing to allow their constituents to suffer just so they could make a point about how partisan they are and how much they hated the Affordable Care Act.
And now if you're a Republican voter and you say, I don't want those bums leeching off the government, right? And I know who you're referring to, and everybody knows who you're referring to. But if you're on Medicaid, I want you to know, according to your definition, not my definition, you're one of those bums. So the Medicaid is from the government. I know, well, Jake, why are you bothering me clarifying the most obvious things in the world? They don't know it. I just talked to a documentarian that talked to a MAGA guy, and he's like, get your government hands off my Medicaid. You idiot, that is the government. Oh, I hate socialism. What is Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security? That is, in essence, socialism. And by the way, again, a failure of the mainstream media. Why? Well, hey, socialism is radical and extreme. And they never clarify. They say, it's obvious. It's not obvious. Do the polling. I bet you a majority of Republican voters would tell you that Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security are not socialist programs, are not. I don't think that even a majority would think that they were government programs, that they were government providing support for people like themselves. No, that's not the government, no way. Government sucks. Hey, don't touch my Medicaid. Yes, if you're getting Medicaid, it's gonna get cut by the Republicans. Get it through your thick skull.
And just to give you a number on how many people would lose their Medicaid coverage, more than 12 million low-income adults who have gained Medicaid coverage through the law's expansion of the program could lose it.
And let me be clear, the great majority of those are white Americans. And a huge percentage, based on demographics in the 2016 vote, were Trump voters. So you idiots, we're trying to protect you so that your family, when they get sick, don't die. Okay, but if you're gonna fight us on it, at least understand you're the one benefiting from the program.
And children, of course, would also be affected by this. According to the Urban Institute and their analysis, in all, enrollment in the program would drop by more than 15 million, including roughly 3 million children who got Medicaid or the Children's Health Insurance Program when their parents signed up for coverage. And there are a bunch of other issues here that don't really get as much attention. They're smaller protections, I guess you could argue, but they do have a huge impact. So for instance, the ACA requires insurance companies to cover substance abuse treatment and they could stop if the law were struck down. Now, as we all know, the opioid epidemic is huge, and there's been very little in the form of solutions from the Trump administration. Getting rid of the Affordable Care Act and the treatment coverage that health insurance companies are now forced to provide would further exacerbate the problem. Also, 40% of people from ages 18 to 65 with opioid addiction, roughly 800,000 people, are on Medicaid, many or most of whom became eligible for it through the healthcare law.
All right, I'm not done yet. So now let me turn to that 109 million number that I gave you guys. Overall, 156 million Americans could be affected by the lifting of coverage caps. So there's yearly caps in the old days before Affordable Care Act, and there was lifetime caps. On lifetime caps alone, according to a Brookings Institute analysis done in 2017, 109 million people could be exposed to those lifetime caps again if we go to the old system, which we would if the Trump administration gets their way in court. So what's the point of health insurance? It's to treat you for sometimes mild conditions. When you do checkups, you're usually doing copays anyway, so you're paying for it. If you've got medium-sized problems, insurance kicks in, you pay a lot in deductibles, premiums, copays, etc., but you're likely going to survive, but actually 40% of the country can't even survive a $400 bill, right? Without having to take out money in a loan, debt, etc., right? But if you get a life-threatening illness, you're a goner. You're almost certainly gonna run into the cap. And when you run into the cap, the first thing you're gonna do is you're gonna bankrupt your family because you gotta pay out of your own pocket. Because what are you gonna do? You're gonna let your mom die? You're gonna let your kid die? No, you're not. You're gonna spend every dollar you have, you're gonna sell your house, you're gonna sell your cars, you're gonna bankrupt yourself. It's not theoretical, it's already happened millions of times in this country. And then after that, you're gonna run out of money anyway, and that family member's gonna die. Hey, but health insurance companies gotta make profits. The private system's great, isn't it? And that's what we're gonna be exposed to again now. Who brought you that? Who is fighting for that tooth and nail, that horrible, horrific system? The Republican Party. It is not in dispute. Anyone who tells you in dispute is a liar and not a journalist. Okay, and finally, we talked about Medicaid, we talked about all the other people affected in every other way. Let's talk about Medicare. Americans love Medicare, including the Republicans. Republican voters love Medicare. They're gonna cut your Medicare. That is also part of this. When the Affordable Care Act helped Medicare recipients in two different ways, it covered more things than Medicare used to cover, and it lowered your prescription drug prices. Now, 133 million Americans, that's roughly half the population under the age of 65, are going to be affected by the pre-existing conditions. And then everyone above the age of 65 that gets Medicare is going to be affected by the factors that I just outlined for you guys. So your prices are gonna go up if you get Medicare. Who's gonna do that? Whose fault is that? 100% the Republican Party. Anyone who tells you otherwise is not a journalist, they're a liar. People would ask me, are you guys journalists? And I would laugh in the beginning. You know, we've been doing the show for a long time. And I'd say, of course not, we're talk show hosts. And now my answer is a resounding yes, but only vis-a-vis the other so-called journalists in this country. Because I had assumed naively when we started 17 years ago that journalists were fair and they would, they aggressively pursued the facts and told the facts no matter what. No, they don't. No, what I've seen is, hey, here's the Democrats say this, the Republicans say this, truth says this, lies say that, but I'm not gonna tell you which one is truth and lies, I'm gonna cover it up. So there are some great journalists in the country. Again, in this case, New York Times, I'll give their names, Reed Abelson, Abby Goodenow, and Robert Pear that did this in-depth analysis. Great journalism, thank you, that's facts. Now they don't blame the Republican Party, but they should. That is what the Republican Party is fighting for, is to rob you of all these things, but that's okay. They gave you good facts. They're, in that sense, better journalists than us, no question. But if you see journalists giving you false equivalency, they're not journalists. And yes, we are infinitely better than them at this. The TYT Plus app is now available on iOS and Android. Download to get more TYT content at tyt.com/app.